DeWanna Bonner walked back into the one arena in the entire WNBA that had every reason to hate her. And before the night was over, her own fiancé had to come
DeWanna Bonner returned to the one building in the entire WNBA where the crowd had been waiting more than a year to let her have it. And by the time the final buzzer sounded, her own fiancé had to physically step between her and disaster. That's the short version of how rough Monday night turned out for the Phoenix Mercury. Let's set the scene properly. On June 22, 2026, Bonner walked onto the floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse wearing Mercury purple, and the moment the public address announcer said her name, the arena erupted, and not in a good way. This wasn't a smattering of boos. It was sustained, full-throated hostility, the kind that only shows up when a fan base has been nursing a grudge and finally gets the chance to let it out. So what exactly did she do to earn that reaction? Bonner had signed with the Indiana Fever before last season, brought in as one of the franchise's headline additions, someone who was supposed to slot in next to Caitlin Clark and help head coach Stephanie White build a real contender. Instead, after only 9 games, she took a leave of absence, requested a trade, got waived, and turned right back around to sign with the Mercury, the team she'd originally come from. There wasn't much of a farewell tour. According to teammate Sophie Cunningham, Bonner didn't even send a text to the locker room she was leaving behind. To understand why Monday's game carried so much weight, you also need to understand the whole Indiana was climbing out of heading in. The Fever arrived having lost 2 in a row, including a lopsided 113-96 defeat against Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream. On top of that, Caitlin Clark had spent the season dealing with a nagging back issue serious enough that it kept showing up on the injury report, to the point where the league reportedly pushed Indiana on its injury reporting transparency. Clark's shooting numbers had cooled off, she'd slipped outside the top 5 scorers in the league, and the outside noise questioning her form was only getting louder. So, a banged-up, frustrated Fever team welcoming back the player who ditched them mid-season. That's not just a regular season game, that's a powder keg with a lit match sitting next to it. And nobody in that building was ready for how the first quarter actually played out, because it started as an unmitigated disaster for the home team. Indiana managed just 6 points in the entire opening period. 6. Reporting on the game noted the Fever were held to 3 points through the first 9 minutes and 58 seconds of play. Phoenix packed the paint, choked off every driving lane, and ran off a stretch that had them up 19-6 after the first 12 minutes. Clark missed her early looks, the offense looked stiff and rattled, and the Mercury bench was feeding off it, genuinely believing they were about to embarrass Indiana in its own building on the exact night the crowd wanted blood. They had no idea what was coming. Clark didn't dress it up afterward. The first quarter was embarrassing, in her own words. And then she spent the next 36 minutes making sure the embarrassment swapped sides. The second quarter is where the entire complexion of the game flipped. Indiana didn't just claw back, they exploded. The Fever dropped 35 points in that single period, one of their best scoring quarters of the season, and used it to drag the game level at 41-41 by halftime. Clark personally scored 15 of those 35 points, an absurd turnaround from a player who'd been scoreless for most of the first 12 minutes. She started pulling up from well behind the three-point arc, hunting her own shot regardless of the play call, essentially deciding on her own that the comeback was happening whether Phoenix liked it or not. Buried inside that surge was a piece of history. Clark put up at least 20 points and 5 assists in her 6th straight game, the longest such streak in WNBA history. CBS Sports, so a player who just suffered through arguably her worst quarter of the year turned right around and authored one of her most ruthless stretches of the season, and set a record nobody had ever touched while doing it. But the comeback was only the warm-up. The real damage came in the third quarter, when Indiana stopped simply matching Phoenix and started burying them. The Fever reportedly outscored the Mercury 30-11 in that period alone, flipping a tied game into a runaway, building a lead that ballooned as high as 19 points. The same crowd that had spent the whole night booing Bonner was now roaring as their team buried the visitors. By the time it was over, Clark had finished with 24 points and 9 assists. Kelsey Mitchell added 22, and the Fever had delivered a complete top-to-bottom beatdown of a team that had walked in talking trash. And that's the exact moment things stopped being about basketball. With about 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter and Indiana firmly in control, Clark picked up a personal foul after getting tangled up with Bonner, who was working to post up near the free throw line. Daily Gazette words were exchanged. Then it escalated fast. The officials hit Clark with a technical, her 5th of the season, and Clark wasn't shy about how she felt about it afterward. She said she'd been told the technical was for clapping, joking that the league should just pick in advance which game she'd eventually be suspended for if officials were going to start handing out technicals for that. CBS Sports, she went further, calling out the official by name and insisting that if any technical deserved to be wiped off the books, it was that one. CBS Sports, Clark has 5 technical fouls through 16 games this season, tied with Angel Reese for the most in the league, and players face an automatic 1-game suspension once they reach 8. CBS Sports, her head coach, Stephanie White, offered a more measured read afterward, saying Clark needs to stay aware of her technical foul count and acknowledging there are some fouls born out of the raw competitive energy of the game that the team could simply do without. Daily Gazette, that foul on Clark was the spark. What followed was the fire. Sophie Cunningham, who has built her reputation in Indiana as something close to Clark's on-court protector, wasn't about to stand back and watch her star get jawed at. As the argument between Clark and Bonner kept boiling, Cunningham walked directly into the middle of it and pointed straight at Bonner. Bonner pointed right back. Both players ended up receiving technical fouls for it. It wasn't a long exchange, but it carried real history behind it. Cunningham had said publicly, months earlier on her own podcast, that while she still wanted good things for Bonner personally, she felt there was a right way to leave a team, even if it was just a quick text saying things hadn't worked out. Whether or not Bonner ever saw that comment, the standoff on the floor made clear the wound hadn't closed. From there it kept escalating. Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas, who is engaged to Bonner, got pulled into a separate exchange of words with Indiana's Myisha Hines-Allen. Hines-Allen had already picked up 1 technical foul in the scrum. Moments later, she picked up a second and was ejected from the game on the spot. By the time order was restored, players on both sides had to be physically separated and held back. Reporting noted that Fever Big Aaliyah Boston had to hold Clark back during the second-half chaos, while Bonner herself had to be restrained by teammates at another point. When the dust settled and officials sorted through the review, 5 different players had been hit with technical fouls in total. Clark, Bonner, Cunningham, Thomas, and Hines-Allen, whose pair of technicals triggered her ejection. Some reports counted 6 technicals total once everything was tallied. Whatever the exact final number, it turned what had been a fairly routine blowout into a genuine on-court incident, with security presence needed to keep both benches apart. The fallout didn't end when the final horn sounded, either. Under the WNBA's 2026 fine structure, Clark's 5th technical of the season carries a $1,000 penalty. Just women's sports, and the other players involved are expected to face fines of their own tied to their technicals, with Hines-Allen's ejection adding extra weight to her case. Cunningham, for her part, played the whole thing off afterward with the kind of shrug that's become her trademark, acknowledging the chaos, but framing it as simply part of competing at this level, the kind of moment a team might wish they'd diffused a little sooner, but not something to lose sleep over once the final buzzer hits. Here's the part that got almost completely buried under all that noise. While her fiancé was at the center of the 4th quarter blow-up, Alyssa Thomas was quietly putting together one of the better statistical nights of anyone on the floor. She finished with 19 points, 5 rebounds, and 9 assists, numbers that on a calmer night would have been the headline. Instead, on a night defined by shouting and finger-pointing, her performance barely registered. The final score read 86-77, Fever. The win pushed Indiana to 10-7 on the season, while Phoenix dropped to a rough 5-13, among the worst marks in the league. Strip away all the side drama, and the basic shape of the story is almost too clean. A player left Indiana without so much as a goodbye, joined a team that has built a reputation for physical, combative basketball, and then walked back into the building she left behind only to get run off the floor by the very group and the very crowd she turned her back on. So what happens next? These 2 teams don't get much of a cooling-off period. Indiana hosts Phoenix again at the same Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Wednesday, June 24th. Tonight, in other words, with essentially the same roster on both sides, the same unresolved tension, and now a fresh batch of fines and bruised egos layered on top of everything from Monday. Cunningham and Bonner have unfinished business. So do Thomas and Hines-Allen. And Clark heads into the rematch sitting at 5 technical fouls for the season, fully aware that the threshold for an automatic suspension is 8, with plenty to say to officials if Wednesday's game gets chippy again. If Monday was the warning shot, Wednesday has the makings of something even louder.
Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video.